At long last, my 3-month plan comes to its conclusion with the promised Dungeons & Dragons video. No politics, no video games, and no annoying, incomprehensible statutes can get in the way of this pure, fandom-driven exercise. Welcome to... Because as a lawyer I have to assume everyone has the baseline knowledge of a second grader, I'm going to start building your assumptions here from the ground up. In this video, I'm going to highlight what makes Dungeons & Dragons, and by extension, pretty much every role-playing game, different than other games. D&D as it's played today is less about number crunching and more about shaping a shared reality between the players. It uses the trappings of games such as probabilistic dice rolling, less to create a balanced system meant to be mastered, exploited, and beaten, but instead to allow players to feel like the world they're inhabiting is fair and that consequences flow naturally from their actions.
I walk over to a rope and I immediately cut it and just fly up.
No, that rope costs money.
So that the sails come down while I go up there.
I'm gonna need an acrobatics check on that.
Very badly. It goes poorly for me.
Well, you're not quite launched into the sea, but you certainly nearly dislocate your shoulder.
I hope that by taking you behind the curtains a little bit on how American law is practiced, I can show you that this is essentially the function of legal systems, and that
we're not so very different.
Lawyers and role-playing game enthusiasts. But first, you know the drill. It's definition time. What is a legal code, you might ask? You, my precious, tiny baby children who have never participated in the world. The example I'm most familiar with would of course be the United States Civil Code, which is the collection of all the current or permanent federal laws in the United States. Pretty straightforward, no? Okay, no. As I focused on in my intellectual property video, nothing in the law is ever pretty straightforward. Of course, legal codes go back way further than the modern United States government. They go back way further than the British monarchy. Hell, historians believe they even go way further back than the Tang Dynasty, or the Torah, or even Hammurabi's famous black stone pillars. You've likely heard of Hammurabi's code before, but if you remember it as the first legal code, you've got it just a teensy bit right, and mostly wrong. It's actually famous because it's the oldest complete surviving written code of laws we currently know of. Codes or systems of law certainly predated the invention of written language, embodied by the oral traditions and the wisdom of elders. Other written codes predating Hammurabi's have been lost or mostly lost to the ravages of time. Thanks to Hammurabi's code and fragments of other codes written in cuneiform, we know some specifics about the ancient laws of various kingdoms and communities in what we now think of as the Middle East. These codes were often preceded and ended with something rhetorical describing the purpose of the code and commanding people to obey it. Unlike many modern legal codes, they also didn't pretend to be comprehensive statements of all laws, or even of all specific kinds of laws. And they rested on a lot of unwritten assumptions and customs that the people of the time would have been reasonably expected to already know. These codes typically sought to provide examples of precedent to follow. Rather than trying to state general principles or even exhaustive rules, they left those kinds of efforts to Yahweh. Speaking of ancient tablets, a few centuries later, the Romans would try their own hand at a written code, known today as the 12 Tables, or the Leges Duodecim Tabularum. Historical evidence suggests that this legislative effort came about after protests from the working-class plebeians seeking some measure of fairness and consistency in their dealings with each other and with the socially elite patrician class. Although this code was also far from comprehensive, it articulated procedures for the courts, the ways in which courts could enforce the laws of the land, and also the rights of citizens to buy, sell, and own personal property and real estate. It wasn't afraid to get too specific about things either, and among other things it specified the acceptable width of roads and allowed landowners to request removal of trees blown onto their property. Not too much later, over in China, the ruling Tang Dynasty wrote down the oldest complete Chinese legal code we currently know of, although there were certainly other codes, both written and oral, before it. The Tang Code was what we'd call a penal code today, and similarly to the Leges Duodecim Tabularum, it established the powers and procedures of the courts. It also attempted to codify specific crimes and the appropriate punishment for those crimes, which inherently turned on dynamics of social class between the perpetrator and the victim. In a shockingly progressive move for the time, it also limited the use of torture in interrogation and testimony, specifying the exact length and width of the stick that could be used for judicial beatings, and imposing punishments on judges who broke those rules. 7th century China, when people in government actually listened when you requested less state-sanctioned beatings. All that is to say, what a legal code is has changed a lot over the centuries, covering all possible spheres of public and private life. Synthesizing these different historical examples, we can safely say a legal code is an effort to write down the rules that a sovereign expects its citizens to follow, and to specify the ways in which those rules are enforced. As seen most strongly with the example of the 12 tables, they are often made in response to the sovereign's citizens demanding some level of equality or consistency from their sovereign, and to assure those citizens that there is some state-sanctioned way to resolve their disputes publicly. Documents like the Magna Carta and the US Constitution are curious inversions of this, where the citizens imposed a public declaration of the rights and responsibilities of their sovereign, but they achieve a similar purpose to legal codes in trying to assure fairness and consistency in the lives of a sovereign's citizens. Now, this all gets a little more complicated in the American and British legal systems because these are what's called common law jurisdictions, where the laws that are written down are only part of the equation in any judicial decision. The other part is precedent, or prior court proceedings, which requires judges in each case to look to previous courts' decisions and to try to ensure that their new decision is logically consistent with prior rulings. Thus, no matter how thorough or exhaustive an American or British statute, collection, or code can get, they're never going to be a guide for the layperson to truly understand the ins and outs of the legal system in these countries. But then again, maybe the idea that any of us can understand how the world functions just by reading some books is a pipe dream anyway. Cue Dungeons and Dragons stuff. Now, veteran roleplayers may already see where I'm going with this, but those of you who've never rolled them bones might be struggling to make the connection. What does the foundation of our society have to do with elves and dwarves and Thaco? Well, perhaps a little insight from the creators of the system can help us out.
In 1971, Gary Gygax created Chainmail, a set of rules that added fantastic creatures and magic into the traditional wargame. In 1972, Dave Arneson approached Gygax with a new take. Instead of controlling a massive army, each player would control a single character, a hero. Instead of fighting each other, the heroes would cooperate to defeat villains and gain rewards. This combination of rules, miniatures, and imagination created a totally new entertainment experience. And in 1974, Gygax and Arneson published the first set of role-playing game rules with TSR Inc., the Dungeons & Dragons game. In 1977, the rules were rewritten and repackaged into the Dungeons & Dragons basic set, and, a year later, the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons was published. In 1989, the long-awaited second edition of AD&D took the world by storm.
Why was this edition necessary? Had anything changed? Well, according to its creators, it was a chance to allow the rules to be reorganized, clarified, and streamlined. According to those same creators, it was not a statement of what any one person thinks or thought the game should be.
The AD&D game evolved over the course of the next 16 years. During that time, the game grew tremendously through play and word of mouth. By 1988, the game consisted of 12 hardcover rulebooks. It was physically and intellectually unwieldy, but still a lot of fun. The time was right to reorganize and recombine all that information into a more manageable package.
Already here, you should be seeing some similarities to a legal code, and even to the US legal code. From this history, we can already see that D&D is a series of rules written and refined over the decades by a cabal of Midwestern nerds. Got it. But what is D&D, man? Maybe there's some more insight into that in the most modern version of these rules, the 5th edition Player's Handbook, or PHB.
To play D&D, and to play it well, you don't need to read all the rules, memorize every detail of the game, or master the fine art of rolling funny-looking dice. No, none of those things have any bearing on what's best about the game. What you do need are 2 things. The first being friends with whom you can share the adventure. Playing D&D is an exercise in collaborative creation after all. And the second thing you need is a lively imagination, or, more importantly, the willingness to use whatever imagination you have. D&D is a game that teaches you to look for the clever solution, share that sudden idea so that you can overcome a problem with your friends, and push yourself to imagine what could be, rather than to simply accept what is. Above all else, D&D is yours. D&D is your personal corner of the universe, a place where you have free reign to do as you wish.
Okay, so very few legal codes have ever started out by telling you that they enable you to have free reign and do as you wish. I'll give you that. But when we start digging into the actual rules put forward in the book, the similarities keep popping out at you. In describing its general premises, the PHB describes itself like this.
The Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game is about storytelling in far-off realms of swords and sorcery. While it does share elements with childhood games of make-believe, D&D gives structure to those stories, a way of determining the consequences of an adventurer's actions.
At its most basic form, D&D and any role-playing game is an exercise in joint creation. However, any collaboration is going to have some conflicts, especially when storytelling is involved. These include fights with monsters, haggling over the price of items, or even interpersonal conflicts like who gets to keep a piece of treasure. Thus, to become more than just an improv class, D&D had to create systems and rules to determine the outcome of these conflicts. It's no coincidence that D&D requires a dungeon master, or DM, to play, and the rules have consistently referred to the DM as a referee over all of these different editions. They could have called him a judge, jury, and executioner, but maybe invoking Judge Dredd and arbitrary capital punishment sets the wrong tone for a friendly game. I think the basic truth is best illustrated by the how to play section of the PHB. Although the book is full of specific instructions on how to deal with things the players may want to do, its most important general principle is very straightforward. 1. The DM describes the environment. 2. The players describe what they want to do. 3. The DM narrates the results of the adventurer's actions. That is, at its most basic, all D&D is designed around. It sets up hundreds of pages of systems and rules to flesh out the expectations players can have of what they want to do, and to give them some rough idea of the outcomes of their actions. Most of those rules can also be boiled down further, although there are certain things that can just happen if the players want it to. Most things boil down to a dice roll. The books sum up this basic mechanic with another 3-part instruction. 1. Roll the die and add a modifier. 2. Apply circumstantial bonuses and penalties. And 3. Compare the total to a target number. This number is set by the DM, and the DM is the sole person to determine whether a roll succeeded or failed. Thus, in every scenario, the DM is still left to resolve it, just as announced in the summary of the total flow of gameplay. No matter what, when players want to do something, the DM ultimately looks to the rules of D&D and determines for everyone whether that action succeeds or fails. That's right. It's all coming together now. But, I hear you say from your naive, precious place, displaced from all space and time, a real code of law wouldn't leave things to the roll of a die. That would be unfair, unjust. No one would be willing to live under a rule of law that explicitly left the outcomes to chance. Oh, honey. Oh, my sweet, precious little baby. I'm so sorry to have to do this to you. The American legal system today expressly turns on chance in all sorts of ways. The most fundamental codified way is its assurance of trial by jury for most civil and criminal matters, which requires that jurors be pulled randomly from the population. Attorneys are keenly aware of this fact and routinely give risk assessments in terms of percentage probability of success at trial. Personally, I always assume that any case with even a remotely defensible legal theory starts out at roughly a coin flip's chance of success, and anticipate different probabilities from there based on things like how sympathetic a litigant is, how clear their memories of events are, how competent and focused on a case their attorneys are, and the simplicity or complexity of their legal claims and the theories involved. Working for insurance companies, these reported percentages of likelihood of success were a vital component of their business, allowing them to create weighted risk models of loss versus expense, and pretty much everyone involved in the legal system has to weigh their chances of success no matter how strongly they feel about their positions. Chance plays an even more prominent but hidden role in the realm of enforcement. The most generous thing you could say about our policing and prosecution is that it's somewhat random, and at least one scholar at the University of Chicago Law School, Bernard E. Harcourt, has made the case that recognizing and embracing the use of random chance in various realms of our legal system would be the fairest possible approach, given the limits of human reason. He points out that randomness is already used in some places in U.S. law, such as the statutorily prescribed coin flip to resolve election ties in some states. And he notes that some research even suggests uncertainty in sentencing is a more effective deterrent to crime than certainty. I and many others disagree that randomness is really the most efficient way to achieve the aims of our legal system and ensure fairness, but it's hard to disagree that truly random selection would be preferable to explicitly racist, sexist, homophobic, and otherwise bigoted methods we've historically seen enshrined in our systems. So yes, legal systems rarely prescribe that our conflicts be resolved with dice rolls. It's a difference, I'll give you. Also, I've stretched the definition of a legal code so thin it would snap apart in the slightest breeze. But I hope I've proved a point, that Dungeons & Dragons is so much more than a game. Like a legal code, it's an attempt to codify and share a whole social system, one that the creators knew couldn't cover every possible scenario it might encounter. Like a US court, which we expect to fill in gaps and apply rules fairly and consistently when matters are up to interpretation, a DM's primary job is to keep his players happy. Like a legal code, the rules may be skirted or worked around by clever players, and we may even choose to declare certain official rules outdated and inapplicable to our modern lives. Just because it's in the Springfield Consolidated Statutes doesn't mean we actually go out there making sure our ducks are all wearing long pants.
There's also a law requiring ducks to wear long pants. Wait a minute, let me see that. Well, I'll be darned, long pants.
Similarly, DMs everywhere pick and choose their house rules, and the PHB implores players to find out and follow those rules, in the spirit of preserving harmony among the players. The most important part of either a legal code or a role-playing game is ensuring this fairness and harmony. All that said, I'm definitely not telling you you're wrong if you want to slavishly follow every rule of D&D to the letter. If that's how you have fun, find the people who want to do that with you, and enjoy your min-maxing. I'm also definitely not telling you to go out and break all the laws you disagree with or think are unfair either.
Or am I? Oh boy, this was quite a journey. Thank you all for joining me on it. My 3-month plan, as I said at the start, is concluded, which means from here on I don't have a plan. I probably need to start making money again, so it's definitely not going to be on this channel, at least not the way things have been going. So I'm going to probably be a lot busier, and if I can get out a video a month, I'll feel very good about it. This is an extremely time-intensive process, so thank you all you YouTube creators who were making a video a week while also working and doing other things with your life, because when I was doing a video a week, that was pretty much my entire life. I don't know how you do it. Thank you all for joining. If you want to see more like this, it's really essential that you tell your friends, hit the like button, comment, subscribe, etc., etc. I've had fun. What's been really encouraging is still seeing a couple of people who, when I put up the videos, are excited to see them, I've enjoyed sharing these with my friends. Thank you to all my friends. Thank you especially to my buddy Scott, whose D&D stuff you saw in the B-roll here. He's got all sorts of D&D stuff that looks really cool and is fun to play around with. And thank you to all of you for watching and hopefully enjoying. I've really had a lot of fun doing this. I hope I get to do at least a few more in the future. I'm sure I'll have something to say about Resident Evil 8, or Resident Evil Village, as they like to call it when it comes out, because Resident Evil is near and dear to my heart. I'm sure I have some things to say about Control, because that's one of the greatest games ever made. So I hope to get those out sometime in the near future, and please look forward to it.